Hi everyone, Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd, doing a personal requested album review of J Dilla's Donuts. This LP was J Dilla's last LP to be released while he was still alive. Unfortunately, he passed away just 3 days later. And because it was pieced together over a long duration of his career, this thing is the result of a lot of different phases in his musical trajectory. Because of that, this thing is just a beautiful, jaw-dropping smattering of hip-hop instrumentals. No track on this album goes over 2 minutes, and I feel like that is so intentional. There's this one track, Don't Cry, I believe, that just is short of 2 minutes by 1 second. Just by 1 second. And that other second could have been in there. But no, every track on this thing is so immediate, straightforward, to the point, and punctual, and that's because nothing on here is really a song per se. Everything really is like a motif. It's a taste. It's a whiff. It's like a donut. It's like a box of chocolates, a box of donuts. You're just trying different things, trying different flavors. There's a jelly, there's a glazed, there's a chocolate. You're just getting a little bit of everything. All these little splashes of color, all these little dabs of musical gold. Critique this thing how you may. Say what you want, negative about it. Just do not call it boring. It can't possibly be that, because nothing really sticks around on this album long enough for boredom to really set in, to be quite honest. I feel like a lot of the beats on this LP are like motifs, like little toys, little widgets, dickory-doos, whatever you want to call them. You just take them out, you look at them, you're like, ooh, that's cute, that's pretty. Little knickknacks here throughout this LP. Yeah, just looking at it, oh, that's cool, put it back, grab another one, put it back. But when you're listening to all these tracks, from beginning to end, a lot of them fade into each other, many of them jump into one another, only a few of them kind of just end and then the next one just starts. But all together, it feels like this really cohesive neo-soul, left-field hip-hop journey, this musical odyssey through the world of underground hip-hop instrumentals. We've got a lot of flavors on this LP, ranging from the really weird track, very strange track called Factory. Also, we have this really smoky, smooth one that I made a note of, Walking on It, and also this really funky track, Airworks, too. Just a lot of different musical emotions throughout this LP. J Dilla really does not work himself into any stylistic corners, except for maybe the fact that he samples a lot of soul. That's sort of come to be expected of him, but he just creates so many moods, so many emotions, just limiting himself to a lot of the same musical sources. And even though I think most of these tracks, most of them, honestly, don't really work outside of the context of the entire album, you know, you take them out, they're fine, they look nice, they're well produced, but they have a lot more punch when you're just listening to all of them in succession. But there are some tracks, these handful of tracks, that when you pull them out, they are just stand-out beats. Beats that are really original, for lack of a better word. Beats that I've never really heard anything like in my life. For example, the track Lightworks is an extremely original beat. And MF Doom used that on his latest LP, Born Like This, of course. And that beat is partially the reason why that's my favorite track on the album. But I digress. So we have Lightworks, which is really strange, really odd beat, just filled with these really kind of eerie tones, and just the way this woman's vocal flies in and out of the track when you know that the thing that the song that was lifted from, it didn't sound quite so minor in the context that J Dilla uses it. I'm sure it was in a much brighter, much more upbeat track, but where he's using it in this song, it sounds kind of like a minor tone, just a kind of a negative thing, an eerie thing. Also, what else did I make note of as a standout track? To me, also, the track Stop really hit me. They had these really fantastic soulful vocals just soaring over these tonality, these really pitchy kind of drones in the background, which could have been woodwinds, could have been violins. They were kind of buried. All I know is that it kind of felt like the voices and the instrumentation behind them were sampled from two different sources, and he just put them together so well. Also, the track People hit me as really original, just with the way that J Dilla is obviously, or was obviously, not afraid to play with some off-kilter rhythm to really sort of put a hip-hop element onto something that people aren't used to. Also, sort of as a side note, I love the sirens all throughout this album. Every time I hear it, I just get, like, excited. It gives this thing, it gives Donuts this really rough, raw, hip-hop mixtape kind of feel, especially with all these shouting voices coming in and out of a lot of these tracks. It just really feels like this kind of underground thing that, you know, you bought from a friend, or you burned off somebody, or you like purchased at a gas station. Just felt like this really kind of underground hip-hop mixtape. And it had kind of this roughness to it. It had a little bit of roughness to it. You know, it wasn't like the most cleanly produced thing on the planet, but the thing is, the fact that it's rough is obviously intentional. It's obviously intentional. J Dilla has produced quite a number of clean beats in his lifetime. I mean, the fact that this thing just kind of feels like it's just sewn together, it's just kind of like just boiled into this one thing, all these beats, is so intentional. And if one bleeds into another a little bit, if one just kind of seems a little bit thrown together, it's kind of like a ragtag group of instrumentals. It's a ragtag group. It's like the Dirty Dozen, except instead of a dozen, you get fucking 31. And as I mentioned before, there is a really prominent soul music influence throughout this thing. And I feel like on some of the tracks that hit me the most with that were the ones that had these really beautiful, soulful vocal cuts in them. One for Ghost, which obviously is sort of a track for Ghostface Killer, and he ended up using it on a song of his, and named it after the vocal cut out of that. God, she beat me with a strap, or she whipped me with a strap. I can't remember off the top of my head, but either way, just that male vocal coming out just really takes me back. Also, the lyrical content of the vocal cut just sort of seemed like something weird, something that you wouldn't usually hear sampled in hip-hop, something that I don't think a producer would usually want to deal with because maybe they're taking themselves too seriously. You Love has some really fantastic group vocals on there, and I have to say my favorite vocal cut on the entire LP, my favorite vocal cut, and maybe this beats out Lightworks, I have to say, is really on Last Donut of the Night. Every single time I hear the vocal cut in that last track, that second to last track, you know, right before the intro, outro, that second to last track, I just want to rip my heart out. Just want to rip my heart out and go, I'm so sad. As I mentioned before, there are some instrumentals on here that when you pull them out of the context of Donuts, they're okay. I can't really say there's a track on here that if I pulled it out of the context of the album, I would think it's bad, especially considering that my first exposure to a lot of these songs was through listening to the entire LP all the way through. So despite that, there are still these other songs that I come back to, these other beats, I guess you could say, these ideas, these motifs that I come back to. Sometimes I'll skip some other beats just to get to them, like Lightworks, like People, just because they're so strange, just because they're so original. They just tickle my ear in a certain way. They just play with my head in a certain way. This thing seriously grows on me with every listen. It's just so chill. It's just so relaxed. It's just so enjoyable. I can't say a bad thing about it, and if I had the chance, I don't know if I would change anything about it. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's easier said than done, but I would have loved a couple tracks in there, a couple more Lightworks, I guess you could say. A couple more of those Lightworks-esque tracks. But other than that, geez, just a great mix of hip-hop instrumentals. I'm really glad you actually got me to sit down and listen to this. I really appreciate that. As a whole, I think this thing is kind of like an anthology. Obviously not of J Dilla's previous work, but an anthology of his abilities, of his ideas, of his talents as a producer. I mean, I'm not the kind of person who believes in fate or outside forces, but I think he was really fortunate. I think all of us are really fortunate that he was able to put this thing out just before he passed away. Alright, Anthony Fantano, J Dilla, Donuts, forever.